So you're thinking about hopping on a GLP-1, Wegovy, Ozempic, any of those injections, but you don't want to end up looking like a sack of bones. Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you can avoid the bag of bones look, but you can also lose weight and keep your muscle, right? Maybe you use the prescription route, maybe you don't. But the thing you need to understand is that whether you go the medication route or the willpower route, you need a framework. And today, that's what I'm going to give you, is the exact framework I've been using with my clients for the last 15 years, right? I'll walk you through the what's and whys and how's with research to back it up, because I know you guys, right? You don't trust just trust me, bro. You want to understand the mechanism a little bit more. And so we're going to do both. We're going to cover the framework and then we're going to cover the why. What's up and welcome back, everybody. I'm glad you're here again with me this week. If you're new, I'm Jenny. I spent my days grinding through Division I basketball, so I know exactly what it feels like when your body used to just perform, no questions asked, right? And then one day there was no season for you to answer to anymore. So for the last 15 years, I've been coaching ex-athletes and busy adults through this exact transition, getting strong, getting healthy, and actually keeping it going instead of peaking for 8 weeks and crashing back to where they started. I'm not guessing at this because I've run this with real clients, watched all of these processes work, and I've sharpened it for over a decade and a half. So if you used to compete and you want your body back without turning the gym into your second job, you are in the right place, my friend. And if you were an athlete, if your identity was built around performance and your body doing the exact thing you asked it to do, and now you've got 10 to 20 pounds sitting on you that weren't there before, then this episode is specifically for you. And I'll tell you up front, I don't want you to have to nerd out about this stuff forever, right? You've already kind of told me, just in our conversations outside of this podcast, that you don't want your part-time job to be calculating macros or debating rep tempo ranges. Like, that's my job. I've chosen this path, so I'm here to do the dirty work for you. And so what I want to provide you is a framework that works, right? It's backed up by something real, the research studies that show that these things actually do what we're claiming them to, and then you want to go live your life. So that's what I've built for you to take away today. And this matters for our community, the former athlete community, so much because generic weight loss advice that you've probably tried hasn't stuck, right? So when you played, your body composition was basically a side effect of your training volume. You weren't managing your weight. The sport that you were playing was actually managing it for you. So when the sport stops and that training volume falls off the cliff completely, your eating habits probably didn't change that much. Or you opted for something that was much more convenient, much more calorically dense. And so when you layer that on with a moderately active adult lifestyle and eating like you're training for 2-a-days, those 10 to 20 pounds tend to creep up on you. And just keep in mind, this is not a discipline issue for you. You know what to do. You know how to work hard. The thing is, you may not have the right structure in place in the right order so that your habits can catch up with your new life. And so we're going to go through this 5-piece framework today, and I'll share a little bit of research behind each of the pieces of it, right? Real studies. We're not pulling numbers out of our butts, right? We're not asking the local gym bros what they think about it. I'm going to tell you the exact sequence to follow these 5 pieces for so that you're not trying to overhaul your life in one day. And at the end, I'm also going to be quite honest about the timeline because it's probably going to be longer than you want it to be. And again, the research is pretty honest on that too. And so as we're going through, one of my clients that I've recently started working with, well, not recently because it's been about almost 2 years now, I can't use her name because of her job and what she does. She's also pretty private. But just, I'm going to reference her throughout this because she has followed this exact framework and now she's down almost 30 pounds, even with 2 knee surgeries, a couple back surgeries, and a couple kids, right? She is back and better than ever into a place where her job isn't the gym. Her job isn't counting macros. It's because we were able to climb that hill and get to maintenance. And this is what I'm going to share with you today. So, before we get into it, I want to kind of focus on a mindset just for a second. And I want to help you shift your mindset, because this one thing will be the piece that affects everything downstream for what we're about to talk about. Okay? And so that shift that I need you to make mentally is that you need to stop thinking about losing weight. And as I mentioned a couple articles and videos ago, like if you wanted to lose weight, I could chop off one of your arms or legs, and that would be 10 to 20 pounds. What I want you to start thinking about is losing fat and keeping, or in some cases, even building muscle. And while this might sound like semantics, it might sound like the same thing, there is actual data on being in a caloric deficit to lose fat, but also maintain or even build muscle. And one of the studies that I pulled is actually out of McMaster University. It was published back in 2016. And they took a group of young men, put them into a pretty heavy calorie deficit. I think it was about 40% below what their calculated maintenance calories were, and then split them into 2 groups. Okay, so both did resistance training 6 days a week. However, one group ate a moderate amount of protein, and the other group ate what is considered in the literature a high protein diet. And that was about 1 gram per pound of body weight, or 2 grams per kilo of body weight. Okay. So looking at the results, the moderate protein group did lose fat, and they held on to their muscle, right? So nothing really changed for them. So when you combine that, that's a pretty good maintenance position to be in. But the high protein group had even better results, right? So eating what I always coach my clients to move towards is that 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Because they ate more of it, they gained over a kilo. Let me translate that for you to freedom units. 2.2 pounds of lean muscle mass, okay? They did this in a deep caloric deficit. And that's the part that's kind of surprising for most folks who are like, well, I can't gain muscle and lose fat. You can, right? I'm here to tell you that you can. The science proves it. And so when you are building muscle while you're losing fat, the scale may not change. However, your body is going to look completely different. Okay? And so there's even a whole body of work from this guy named Eric Helms. I followed him for years and years. And he does a ton of systematic reviews, which is just nerd talk for reviews of lots of studies together, that focus on protein intake in resistance-trained lean individuals, aka your gym bros, right, who are doing a cut. But we're not focused on that population right now. We're talking about folks who have a legitimate 10 to 20 pounds to lose. And so this is why this matters, is that a lot of times folks go on a diet, they slash calories, and they lose weight. But that's not what we're going for. Remember, that mindset shift that we talked about. I don't want you to look skinny fat. I want you to look lean. I want you to feel like the athlete that you used to be, right? So that's why you can still hit a target weight and look soft when you just try to lose weight. But when you try to lose fat and build muscle, that's when you start to look the way you want. That's what I call the athletic aesthetic. That's what I chase. I want people to ask me what sport I played. You probably do too. That's just a nice feeling that you want to get. And so with this, we have to protect the muscle. Remember, muscle is the thing you keep, fat is the thing you lose. Okay, so it's different goals than the regular person, different playbook. Okay, so now let's talk about what these 5 pieces of the framework are, and I'm going to go through them in order that you would do them and in the order that I use with my clients. And so the first piece is committing to moving every single day. That doesn't mean 10,000 steps a day. So that's where a lot of coaches start their clients, and it doesn't always work out because that can feel overwhelming. It is the number one way to have this feeling of, I did too much too soon, now I'm hurt, now I'm burnt out, now I've got to start this whole thing over. And it's a careful it's a careful play that we have to make with our community of former athletes, because your brain still thinks you can go from 0 to 100 real quick, but our bodies aren't able to keep up. Okay, so the way that we do this is that we figure out where you're starting from. We get a good measure, whether you're wearing a watch, a ring, your phone tracks your steps, whatever the number is, that's our baseline. That's where we're starting from. And then we build every couple of weeks. We could do 10% a week, we could do 5% a week, but ideally, we're adding a little bit at a time so that your body has time to adapt, okay? And I'm sure you've heard that 10,000 steps is the magic number, but that is actually coming from a marketing campaign from a Japanese pedometer company back in the 1960s. And last time I did the math on this, the 60s were 60 years ago, and the science has changed. And the way that it looks now, based on more recent research, is that once you go through your initial fat loss phase, weight maintenance is managed at about 8,500 steps per day. If you needed to lose a little bit more, you would obviously increase slightly, but most of the time, the work is done in that initial phase to lose the weight. Maintenance becomes easier if you've got the habits ingrained. And so when we're looking at our major chunk of energy expenditure throughout the day, how many calories we burn essentially every day, we can do it just with general inefficient activities like walking, like parking at the back of the parking lot, just being more doing chores around the house instead of hiring someone, right? All of those count into this bucket that we call NEAT. Okay, so the researchers came up with this term. It stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, right? And it's every calorie that you burn when you're not sleeping, eating, or doing a structured workout. It's basically what you burn to exist, and it is one of the biggest levers for weight loss, more importantly, for fat loss, and it doesn't touch your energy deposits the same way that a hard workout does. There's a lot of anxiety that gets built up around hard workouts, and you're only going to burn 300-400 calories max, but your NEAT accounts for well over 1,000 calories of energy or calorie burn every single day. So would you rather burn 1,000 or burn 300? Ideally, I would take the 3,000, right? Because you can do walking, you can do chores when you're tired, you can do those things on a rest day, where a hard workout is really just reserved for your training days, okay? And if you're a coach, here's a bonus one, okay? This has nothing related to a study, but if you are a sport coach, you're probably already maximizing your NEAT. So you're already one step ahead. You're on the court, you're walking campus, you're checking classes, you're running workouts, right? This piece, if you're a sport coach, might actually already be done for you. So no need to start here. You can actually advance to the second piece of the framework. And this is something that I noticed when I was a graduate assistant at Appalachian, that the amount of snacks that were always available in the office, and I even, not only as a graduate student, but when I was working as an executive at a gym company, the amount of snacks that would be consumed throughout the day. You finish a call, you go get a snack. You write up an email, you go get a snack. You want to get a snack? You go get a snack. And this one actually has some real science backed up behind it for snacking all day versus having more of a structured meal plan. And this is a study that looked at eating 2 meals per day compared to 6 meals per day, exact same calories, and essentially there was no change in weight. But when you started to look at things like insulin sensitivity and fasting blood glucose, which are the numbers that actually matter the most for you, and reports of less hunger, the 2 meals a day outperformed the 6 meals per day. And that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because consuming the smaller meals, which is kind of similar to grazing, right? Your insulin never really comes back down to baseline, right? It's a moderately high hum all day instead of a clean rise and fall after each meal, right? You get a spike, you come back to baseline. That's the natural rhythm. But when you're eating out of boredom rather than actual hunger, that's when most snacking occurs, right? You're adding calories without satisfaction, and you're setting yourself up for insulin resistance because your body is having to pump out more insulin more often to deal with the food that's coming into the system. Now, the 6 meals a day piece came from bodybuilders on anabolic steroids who needed to eat and recover because they were training at such a high volume. But last time I checked, that's not you. That's not me. We need these structured meals, and we need them to space out those insulin spikes so your hormones, your hunger hormones especially, can reset between meals, right? And this is what lets you eat until you're about 80% full versus managing low-grade hunger signals that never really turn off. And those hunger signals show up as cravings, okay? So eat the big meals, fill yourself up, and we'll talk about what goes into those meals here in just a little bit. So now this next piece is probably not going to be a shock to anyone who's read or listened to any of my content ever. Strength training. Like for me, this is the foundation because I am a nerd when it comes to this stuff. But for many of you, this is something that you got away from once your career was over. And that's okay. But just understand that it is a pillar in a healthy lifestyle. And strength training is not the same as Orange Theory. It is not the same as circuit training. I'm talking real strength work here. Training in that 5 to 8 rep range, pushing close to, but never achieving true failure, right? You're leaving a rep in the tank on every set, but it is challenging at the end, okay? Now, when you start training in this way, yes, you're going to be sore at first, but resistance training close to failure is the thing that sends the signal to your brain and body to hold on to that muscle tissue, especially when you're in a caloric deficit. So when that signal happens, your body is going to use the resources that it has available to repair the muscle, to repair the tendons, right? Protein does a lot of that for us. Carbohydrates are the thing that's going to fuel our brain, but it now starts to be judicious in how those macronutrients are distributed, okay? So not anything really goes into storage. And the cool thing about it is when you go to train and you provide the body with carbohydrate, your body will actually use the carbohydrate during training, then it will use the protein after training, and then the days in between, now you can start actually utilizing fat as the main fuel source, meaning anything that's in storage gets used, and that's where we start to lose fat, okay? But when you're in a caloric deficit and you haven't eaten enough protein and you're not strength training, there is no signal to hold on to anything. You end up just losing weight. And remember, we're not just losing weight. Regular people lose weight. We're trying to achieve an athletic aesthetic. We're trying to look like we know what we're doing if someone were to hand us a basketball or a soccer ball or a volleyball or whatever, okay? And here's the part that nobody really says out loud, which is probably not the best thing to happen, right? Is that when you lose 10 to 20 pounds without training, your skin doesn't shrink to match your new frame. That's where you start to look like a meat suit hanging on a hanger, right? The skin has some elasticity, but muscle is the thing underneath the skin that gives it a little bit of shape, right? So when you lose fat and you lose muscle, you end up just looking deflated, right? But if you lose fat and keep your muscle, then you start to look tight. And that's what a lot of people go for. They're not just looking to be smaller, they're looking to be tighter, right? So the way to do that is you actually have to train the muscle. One, to make it strong so it can carry you through and give you more energy on your non-working days. But two, to actually build a little bit of muscle so that you have some shape, but also so that you can utilize the macronutrients that you're consuming more efficiently. All right? Because at the end of the day, there is a huge difference between being smaller and being leaner. I'm always going to opt for the leaner version. So let's talk about my client for a second, okay? As we were going through and setting up this framework, she wasn't an in the gym gal. She was busy with her career, busy with her family. And one of the first things that we did in order to get the scale to move was get her moving again. So piece one of this framework, commit to moving. Piece two was eat whole foods. Again, she was, not eat whole foods, stop snacking and grazing, like stick to stricter meal windows. Okay, again, on the go, running kids around, pretty easy to snack versus committing to the 3 meals a day and potentially one snack. Okay. And as we were talking, we started to realize she didn't just want the scale to move. She wanted to look put together on the other side of this thing, right? She didn't want to be smaller. She didn't want to be softer. She wanted to be leaner. She wanted to be tighter. And so when we started, twice a week on the strength work was the bare minimum. She didn't like it at first, but once she started to see some results, that was when it became a no-brainer for her, right? And not only did she start to lose fat, when she had her annual blood work done, it was night and day different, okay? So as we're looking at this, it's not optional if you want to be healthy. It's not optional if you actually want to look good. You actually need to go strength train. And while we're here, let me bust a myth real quick, because I've had my friends ask me this almost constantly, right? With strength training, soreness is not the goal. If you go on Instagram, you see trainers pushing people to the max. They're just getting blasted. That is hard training, but that might not be intelligent training for you, right? So if you can't walk down the stairs after your workout session, especially after you've been doing it for a while, that's not working hard. That's poor programming, right? And some of the research that I mentioned earlier, right, that talks about the 5 to 8 rep range, close to failure training, with the higher protein intakes, right? That translates into real results, right? Not just you being blasted. Like, that's a short-term dopamine hit. What we are looking for is something that's sustainable, because when you do go on vacation, I want you to feel comfortable walking down the beach. When you do go to that conference, I want your clothes to fit you and you show up as your best self. I want, when you're walking through the airport, that someone asks you what sport you played, okay? And it's a thing that if you're doing this consistently, adding in the strength training on top of it, you're going to be in a really good spot, okay? So now, let's talk about the whole foods piece that I maybe blabbed a little bit too early about. But this is the fourth piece of this. Once you start to figure out what your meal times are, and you're moving, and now you're strength training, this is a turn of the dial to get a little bit more refined in what you're eating, okay? So the first piece of eating the structured meals is going to naturally decrease the amount of food that you're eating, the amount of calories, I should say, that you're eating in a day, okay? But this next piece is going to make sure that you're getting the right nutrients for your body, because your body just doesn't run on protein, fats, and carbs. It also runs on vitamins, it runs on minerals, it runs on electrolytes. And if you're eating highly processed foods, often you're missing out on the micronutrients that drive your hormone responses, that, especially, God forbid, you're in perimenopause if you're a woman, and you're in menopause if you're an older guy, right? So I want you to focus on eating mostly whole foods, minimizing the amount of processed foods that you're consuming. And when you are at your meal, eat to about 80% full. So let's talk about the whole foods piece of this piece of our framework first. Like I mentioned, whole foods are nutrient dense, but they're not calorie dense. If you were to hold up 500 calories of broccoli compared to 500 calories of mac and cheese, those two things are going to be night and day, okay? And when you're talking about protein and we're eating whole foods, which means we're not getting a lot of added chemicals and oils, your protein source will cover your proteins and fats, okay? You're cooking your vegetables and starches, right? Those cover a little bit of carb, a little bit of fat, and a lot of bit of vitamins and minerals, okay? And keep in mind, I keep bringing up fat because it's important. You actually need fat in your diet for vitamin absorption and as a way to keep your skin and hair and nails healthy as well. So there is a little bit of vanity when it comes to eating fats. You don't eat fat and get fat. You get fat by eating too many calories, which is why we're talking about managing it with whole foods, okay? And carbs are not the devil, FYI. I think I talked about in one of my last pods, right? This whole thing is about getting all of your macros and micros from the foods in your diet, and all your body has to do is to digest them and absorb them, okay? And this is going to be the natural cap on how much you're able to eat before you are full. So if we look at a study, because remember I told you I was going to back a lot of this stuff up with studies, okay? This study looked at over 9,000 adults and their intake of ultra-processed foods, okay? And looked at one of their systemic inflammation markers, okay? This inflammation marker is also a strong predictor of heart disease and type 2 diabetes, which heart disease is the number one killer in the U.S., and type 2 diabetes, 1 in 10 people is diagnosed. Even more are walking around undiagnosed, okay? So people in the highest ultra-processed food intake group were 11% more likely to have elevated inflammation. Meaning you're walking around puffier than you need to because your body is fighting against the food that you're eating, okay? And here's a piece of this that surprised me as well, right? So people getting up to 60% of their calories from ultra-processed foods had a 14% higher likelihood of elevated inflammation than the lowest group. So the less ultra-processed foods you're eating drops the inflammation that you probably don't even know that you are experiencing. So if your knees ache for no obvious reason, that could actually be low-grade inflammation, chronic inflammation, not just acute, you rolled your ankle and it swelled up. That is acute inflammation. We're talking chronic over months and years, okay? Not just wear and tear from your playing days. And inflammation, like I mentioned, is a big part of what makes people look puffy, often soft around the middle, and even when the scale hasn't moved much, like maybe it's one of those things that you start to deal with because it's not always fat. Sometimes it's just inflammation on top of the fat that you're already kind of working through, okay? So eat whole foods, eat to 80% full. 80% full means you could probably take a couple more bites, but you're not going to. You're going to leave a bite on the plate. This is not elementary school where you are being forced to clean your plate. When you feel like you are 80% full, like you could probably eat a little more, but then you'd be stuffed, that's when you stop, okay? And it's kind of like when you leave a rep in the tank, it allows your body enough time, enough resources to properly digest rather than rushing through digestion, okay? And the last piece of this, now that we've talked about moving, we've talked about eating, we've talked about training, so moving again, and then we talked about eating again. Now we're going to talk about one piece that ties it all together because all of those things are actively pushing you towards something. Whereas when people start to think about sleep, it's not something that comes to mind as a fat loss enhancer. However, it is. And the reason I bring this up is because I'm going to lump you in with most Americans, because for this one you actually are. But most Americans are underslept relative to what they're asking their brain and their body to do, right? If you want to sleep well, you need a cool room, you need a dark room, you need to limit distractions, right? So TV off, phone down, get your kids in bed, then you put your butt in bed. Because this is where recovery actually happens, right? If you're pushing hard in workouts, you're hitting your activity with steps, you're eating well, this is where you need the recovery, right? And this is where most people miss. And there's genuinely a fair amount of research behind this, right? If you limit your sleep to 4 hours for a couple of nights in a row, the stop eating hormone, ghrelin, drops, right? And so now you start to get those cravings, and most often you're not getting a craving for a salad, right? You're getting something that is high calorie, it's sweet, it's salty, or it's some combination of the two, okay? And then another study says, you know what? When you don't sleep well, you lower your leptin, you increase your ghrelin. So leptin says, hey, stop eating. Ghrelin says, hey, eat more. And you end up with a higher body mass index. AKA, you eat more when you're awake for more hours. You eat less when you are awake for less hours. That's the natural rhythm. And so if you're underslept, you're not in bed for long enough, then what are you going to do to fill the time that you're awake? Maybe you stuff your face, okay? Maybe let's don't do that, okay? So, to summarize this section, right? If you're underslept, it's not just that your body's tired. It's that your hormones are out of whack and is driving you to be and feel hungrier than you normally would, okay? And then it's going to drive up the level of cravings for foods that are working against everything that we've laid out in the framework before. And again, it's because your body reads as, I've been awake for longer, aka I need more fuel. Even though you're not actually burning any more meaningful calories by being awake. You're going to burn the same amount, and you're not able to offset those calories with activity, probably because you're tired, right? So you're really just eating more for a reason that isn't real. And we want there to be a reason for the meal, right? So let's take a second, because I know these 5 pieces are probably going to be a lot to hold in your head all at one time, right? And I promised you a framework, not a lecture. So, move daily. Build towards 8,500 steps, cap it at 10,000. Anything more than that, and you're just probably going on a walk. You want this to be a part of your daily life, not another set of workouts that you need to do. Okay, so however you can get to that as inefficiently as possible, whether it's around the house, mowing your lawn instead of hiring the kids to mow your lawn, anything like that where you're up and moving and being productive, okay? The second piece is eating structured meals instead of grazing, right? Pretty straightforward there. Strength train twice a week. Make sure you're hitting 5 to 8 reps, close to failure. Eating mostly whole foods. Stopping the meal when you're about 80% full. So that means even if there's food left on the plate, not the end of the world. Then sleep in a cool, dark, distraction-free room. 5 pieces. And 5 pieces that aren't random. They are in order of importance of building a foundation and then adding layers. Okay, so we're not just throwing everything at you to see what sticks. It's being intentional with the work. And none of these, if you think about it, are complicated on their own. But when you try to do them together all at the same time, it gets a little overwhelming. And so if we can start and take some time to build up to that, we've got the right sequence now. Okay. So how do you actually start with these 5 things and keep them going forever rather than burning out in a week or two? Well, you start with the activity piece, right? We already talked about hitting the 8,500 steps, right? It's the easiest lever to pull. It jumpstarts your metabolism and will help you feel confident sooner rather than doing something that you might possibly fail at, right? And it gives your NEAT, remember that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that NEAT boost that we talked about without even touching your diet at all, okay? And once that's a habit, not a New Year's resolution, not a I'm going to do this for 30 days. Once it's a habit, then you start to layer in the meal pieces, right? We start with swaps, not overhauls, but get the structure in place first for the 3 meals a day. Then you can start to swap, okay? After we've started strength training, then we move into the swaps, okay? So here's a fun one for you. Okay, when we start talking about food swaps, and maybe this is a piece all on its own. If I were to compare Blue Box mac and cheese to a baked potato, or potato chips to an actual potato, no salt, no butter, just the potato, you are going to feel fuller from eating the potato than you will from eating that Blue Box mac and cheese or the potato chips. Now, here's the test to prove this to be true. I know that I can sit down on a Saturday afternoon watching college football and eat a whole bag of barbecue Lay's potato chips. I've done it. I've tested this. I know I can. But in a large family-sized bag of Lay's barbecue potato chips, there are actually 4 to 5 whole potatoes. Okay? So I've sat and eaten the equivalent of 4 to 5 whole potatoes. I don't know anyone that could do that, not even some of the competitive eaters that we watch on TV. But somehow we can sit and eat a whole bag of potato chips, right? Same amount of ingredients, different preparations, and different engineering for us to eat more of one, but not of another. And that's not an accident, but that is just an illustration of the entire business model of the processed food industry. And this is why people tend to overeat on these snack foods. So once you cut the snacking out, that doesn't mean you can't go have a potato chip, but it means taking a handful or 2 out, putting it in a bowl, and walking away from the bag versus just continuing to stick your hand into the bag. And if you want to try this out for yourself, go for it. Go ahead and make 4 baked potatoes and try to sit down and eat those in one sitting. When you start to understand the logic and start to understand the swaps that you can make just like that, right? Your eating starts to look more logical than it does emotional. Because now you're not white knuckling against your own willpower, right? You're not trying to hold on to a bag of potato chips designed by food scientists to beat your willpower. Foods like this are designed to be hyper palatable. Your brain turns off when you start eating them. It's mindless eating. But when you're actually having to choose something that's a little bit plainer, but much more nutrient dense, your body has an automatic off switch, okay? Another swap here, because this is just one example with the potato chips, is if you drink Gatorade still, or Powerade, or whatever the, even Liquid IV has sugar in it because you feel like, that's associated with who you are and who you were, swap it for a sugar-free version, whether it's just an electrolyte packet or diet soda. Like, switch to the other for 2 weeks and let's see how you're doing there. I'm more surprised by how many people still drink fully leaded sodas. And by fully leaded, I mean full sugar, not the zero sugar or diet. That sugar is just liquid calories adding up to it. And if you were to go for just water or even water with an electrolyte packet, you'll get the same thirst quenching effect, but with way fewer calories. And if you can save calories there and move calories to a meal, then you're doing really well, because liquid calories don't trigger satiety, meaning feelings of fullness, in the same way chewing food does. Okay? And if we think about this, we're not using willpower to make these changes. We're actually using a technique called habit stacking. Okay? You're not asking for these wide sweeping changes all at the same time. You're attaching a new behavior to something you're already doing. And then you're letting it become boring and automatic, just like brushing your teeth, and then adding the next one. And sleep might be the biggest enhancer, because sleep fixes itself once the first two pieces are in motion. The more energy you spend during the day, the sleepier you are at night. Physical activity is one of the most consistent and well-established ways to improve sleep quality, independent of everything else. So when you're ready to lose fat, turn the screens off, cut your caffeine at 2 o'clock, and get rid of some of those evening stressors, the emotional TV show or the work email, whatever is getting you wound up before bed. Try to move away from that. And if you can, keep in mind that all of these changes aren't going to happen in a 4-week period. They're not going to happen in 2 months. You might not even hit the full 20 pounds of weight loss that you had planned to, that maybe you were chasing on the scale. If you are actually building muscle and losing fat, the scale may not budge, even though your body has transformed. And so when we talked about this idea of changing your mindset, this is exactly why. Because if you're losing fat and gaining muscle, the scale doesn't know the difference between the two. So your weight may actually be stagnating, but your body is changing rapidly. So stop chasing the scale. Find a pair of pants that used to fit. Find a shirt that you want to fit around the midsection again. Chase how your body actually looks and feels, how your clothes sit on you, how you look in the mirror with your shirt on or shirt off, pants on or pants off. And that will tell you how the scale is lying to you, okay? And now you kind of know the background of why that scale is probably the biggest liar in the fitness industry. So let's put a number on it so that it's not abstract. Say over the next 3 months you lose 8 pounds of fat and gain 3 pounds of muscle. That scale is only going to show you that you lost 5 pounds. But your body is going to look different. And that's 5 pounds after 3 months of consistent work. Most people would say, God bless, that's not what I wanted. I'm done. I'm over this. But if the actual fat loss was 8 pounds and you gain 3 pounds of tissue that's tighter, that's denser, that's more metabolically active, then the scale's lying to you because it's omitted certain pieces of data. It's not wrong, right? The net sum is there, right? You netted 5 pounds of weight loss. True. But that's why your clothes, your mirror, often your spouse's eye, are better measurement instruments than the scale that you step on first thing in the morning. So, if you are ready to start attacking those 10 to 20 pounds that you want gone, you've probably already tried to do this alone, probably more than once. And if you're still trying to knock it out, then those attempts haven't worked. And that is not a knock on you by any stretch of the imagination, right? It's just hard to build a framework for yourself, hold yourself accountable to it, and to be able to interpret the data correctly. Because even for me, having a coach has made a huge difference over the last few years, okay? And this is especially hard if you've got a job and a life outside of what you're trying to make happen at home and make those changes. And part of the reason I wanted to share this with you guys is because this is what I do with clients, right? It's the exact process, the steps, the structured meals, the strength training, the focusing on whole foods, the sleep practices behind, for now, for my one client, almost 30 pounds of transformation that I mentioned earlier, right? She started exactly where many of you are. Frustrated, doing pieces of this on her own, possibly in the wrong order, and then not seeing the change that she wanted. and still trying to force it. Okay? What we're doing here is just using the same framework, done in order and done for long enough. That's the whole secret. There is no other secret to this idea of a transformation. So if you are ready for that transformation, come find me. Let's talk, and then we'll get after it. Until next week, friends, we'll see you.